everyone. Welcome today to Cybersecurity Chats. I am Mark Lupker, the Director of Education out of the Cyber Center for Education and Innovation, home of the National Cryptologic Museum. And we're very happy today to have the Queens of Code on the agenda today. You are in for a treat. These folks have been there from the very beginning of computers and security within those systems. And so I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Eileen Buckholtz. She has as a master computer scientist with many published works, former teacher for 17 years in IT. She's a Ohio State Buckeye graduate of her undergrad degree and got her master's in computer science at the University of Maryland and her chief information officer certificate through the National Defense University. She has with her today Maureen. I'm going to let Eileen introduce Maureen. But ladies and gentlemen, you have folks here who started working on computers back in the 70s on the UNIVAC systems and all the way through the World Wide Web into the 90s. So you're in for a treat today. Please know that we have a Q&A up. If you have a question, please ask. These ladies have been there and done that, and they would love to share that with you. We also have a chat room if you prefer to use the chat room. But either way, Christine Harding, my cohort in crime here on the Cybersecurity Chats, will be monitoring the Q&A in the chat so that we can provide your questions to Eileen and Maureen. So with that, Eileen, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Mark. We are really excited to be here. And I'm also joined by one of my coworkers and very good friends, Maureen McHugh. She and I have been together since the early days of the 70s, and Maureen worked with early computers like supercomputers and went on to be one of our senior managers at the agency. So after I give my talk, Maureen will tell you about some of her stories. As I said, we are excited to be here virtually with you today to talk about our Queens of Code project, which is telling the stories of NSA's computing women. If you are watching this presentation live with us today, or even later in 2020 or maybe beyond, you as students, teachers, your families in the world are facing big challenges dealing with the pandemic. The future is uncertain and life may be different from what we've known. You may feel your life is on hold, but I'm here today to tell you your imagination isn't on hold. Daydreaming isn't on hold. Exploring possibilities for your future career is not on hold. And this is a rare opportunity to think about your future career without the usual distractions of our normal busy schedule. One area we think will be very important in finding our way forward is technology. We are using it today for e-learning, web meetings, virtual workspace, online shopping, recreation, and more. We hope our stories will inspire you to think about a career in tech. The present and the future needs you. So I'm going to share my screen here. Have you ever had a big secret you couldn't tell anyone? We have one too. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we were computer pioneers working on cutting-edge technology for the very secret National Security Agency. Because the work that we did was very highly classified, we couldn't tell anyone. We couldn't tell our husbands, our kids, our parents, or our friends. And this is the first time we've talked about our stories and experiences online to students. So you are here with the first, and we hope learning more about our past experiences will help you see the possibilities in tech for your future. We've kept our secret for 50 years or more, and if we didn't share them now, they might never have been told. I'd like to have a special thanks to all the women who have come together to be part of our project. Telling their stories was not an easy task. They had to remember what happened 50, 60, 70 years ago and write them down, and then we had to get them approved by our agency before we could share them. And with things the way they are these days, I have sometimes trouble remembering what day of the week it is. So imagine trying to remember what happened 50, 60, 70 years ago. There were about 150 women who were queens of code and worked in many areas of technology. At our agency, they were about 10% of the technical workforce and were recruited by the agency from some of the best schools in the country. Actually, many of us were recruited during the height of the Vietnam War, when there was a lot of unrest on college campuses. And actually, the military defense department was not really welcomed on the campuses. So it was kind of surprising that our academic advisors pushed us to take these interviews with this little known agency called the National Security Agency. But we did. And the recruiters said, well, we can't tell you what you'll be doing, but all we can say is you'll be working with the latest technology. And those who signed up found out that was true. Some of us had majored in math and physics, some in the first computer science, BS and MS degrees in the country, and some people came in from other areas like arts and language. 1968, NSA had over 100 computers, over 5 acres of computer rooms in the building. So that gave us a lot of opportunity to work on the cutting edge kind of systems. So one of the reasons we did this project was to let people know that women were working in computers in the early days of the computing industry, and that our ladies, our women, created innovations in technology, some that you see today in the internet and search technology and word processing systems and all sorts of applications. Only a few women have been recognized in the computer industry. And if you search the web, or as I did, I went to the National Computer Museum out in California near San Francisco, and I found that even though the computers we had worked on were out in this museum, that the women really weren't mentioned. Only maybe 2 that you've heard of were Grace Hopper and Ada Lovelace from the 1800s, and Grace, who had helped develop a program called COBOL and work on the MARC computers. So the books about computers portrayed it mostly as a boys' club, and we wanted to try to correct the records. Our systems had to run 24/7 because NSA's mission was to provide life and death information to men and women in the field, as well as key decision makers in our government. We deciphered adversary codes and protected our own codes. Many depended on intelligence to give the U.S. a competitive advantage. Along the way, we fought for women's rights and fair promotions, child care, maternity benefits, flexible work schedules, work from home, part-time, that made our workplace more friendly to women. And we want to be role models for students to encourage them to pursue STEM careers. We also want to tell the girls in our audience, the young women in our audience, as well as men who might not think about a career in technology, that if women like your grandmothers and great aunts could have 50 years of rewarding and fun careers in tech, and also, I might add, well-paying careers, then so should you, and it should be something you should consider. When I was working at NSA, I was fortunate to work with many talented and amazing women. We worked on projects and teams and cross-agency working groups and many highly technical and critical issues of the time. And as an aspiring writer, I felt we had a story to tell about working on early computers. But we were in a very classified environment, and it would have been impossible back then to tell our stories. But it's been 50 years since then, and we've had some things happen. One was the publication of Liza Mundy's Code Girl books that told about the story of 10,000 women who came up to Washington, D.C. to help in World War II to decipher the codes. And it's a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, you should. Another was the movie that many of you have seen called Hidden Figures, and it was about our sisters who were working at another similar sounding agency in NASA, which was concerned with the space program and their careers. And they were also involved with they were human computers and then got into some early computers. So that's kind of how this thing started. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about just my background, my stories to share that. I was a master computer scientist at NSA for 31 years. I started in 1970. I have published over 40 books, some young adult books called like Micro Adventures that taught kids how to program in BASIC in the 80s. I've also done web design and a professor of IT. I currently work, even in my 70s, as a cybersecurity consultant with a company, and I enjoy doing that. Now, one thing that I like about my career in computing and at NSA is that something exciting happens almost every day. And you have opportunities to solve problems and at an NSA contribute to our national defense. And this is especially true today, too. If you go into Google and search tech news, you can see the variety of new applications and technology being developed and brought to the world. And if you go in and type cybersecurity news, you can see all the things that are happening in cybersecurity every day, too. And some of those are very both exciting and also frightening about the kind of things that are happening that we need to defend against. So technology is certainly changing our lives every day. I was born in 1949 and raised in Middle Georgia, Warner Robins, Georgia. And I was a smart girl. And I think smart girls back when I was growing up had a tough time because the girls were not supposed to let the boys know that we were smart or smarter than they were. And today I think that smart girls also have a tough time. But I can promise you, if you pursue being smart and what that means to your career, that you will grow into appreciating that you have the intelligence to pursue some of these highly competitive areas. Back in 8th grade, I was voted most intellectual in middle school. And it was, you would really want any other superlative other than most intellectual, but this is a picture from my yearbook. I was interested in math and in writing. And then I went to Ohio State, where I got to work on IBM 360s, and I graduated age 20 with the first degree that Ohio State gave in computer science. And I'll tell you a little story about when I was in 8th grade. The teacher, we had an eccentric teacher named Mr. B, and the last semester of our grades, he said, instead of all the tests you've been taking, which I had an A average in, he says, we're going to throw all those out, and we're going to have a kite building contest. And we're going to put you in teams, and the team that has the highest flying, the longest flying kite gets an A, and so on. People down the road get lesser grades. So my friend Nancy and I never built a kite, but we went to the library, as smart girls do, because Nancy was a smart girl too. And we found a book about how to build a kite. And Nancy's mother donated a very ugly chiffon dress, which we cut up and made a kite. And on the day that we had the kite flying contest, Nancy's and my kite was top flying kite in the contest. And we got our A. So it kind of proves that, doing your research and your homework and being diligent, you can come out on top. When I went to the agency, one of the first things I did was do applications programming. I worked on a system called UNIVAC 494s, which is one of the older computers. And I also programmed in a language called Fortran. And after that, I moved into something called systems programming. And systems programming meant that you actually worked on the operating system. And when you're an applications programmer, you often work with users to define the problem and get the requirements. Then you use a programming language. Today it might be Python, Ruby, C or C++ or Java. And as I said, we used Fortran P01, an assembly language. And we also had the thing on the bottom here is my plastic template that I used. And this was how we designed our systems. We would flowchart the steps in the system. And today they have some more automated tools that you can use. One of the things that would happen when our systems would crash, because there would be bugs in our system, there were about 100,000 lines of code that would come with a new system for the UNIVAC 1108s. And then we would put another 10,000 lines of code into it to do special things like computer security or I maintained something that helped the printers print in Cyrillic, which was Russian, because we were doing some Russian codes and stuff. And the systems would crash every so often, and we would collect all the what we call dumps, and they would be about this high, full of paper, and they would be just all the octal locations and what was in all the cells of the computer's memory. And then our boss would make it fun, and he would say, we're going to have a murder mystery party. We're going to find out who killed our system. It was kind of like the early days of computer forensics, except we didn't have any tools except our brains. And we would sit around going through every cell, every register in the computer till we could figure out what had gone wrong, and then we could correct it, and hopefully the systems would run a little better. One other story I'll tell you back when I was doing my next job, I was doing requirements and planning, and I worked on a big plan, NSA's first telecommunications and computer plan. And one of the parts of this plan is we had to do an inventory of all the computers that we had. And we had thousands of computers and terminals, but we didn't know that what we had. And there was a new technology that just come out, and would you believe it was called barcoding? So we talked to people down at Kroger who were just starting to use it, were thinking about using it. And the first handheld barcode reader had come out, and we were able to put labels on all our devices and hook it up to where they were and who it belonged to. And that was one of our first inventory systems for managing our computer systems. So next, I'm going to introduce Maureen. And Maureen, you can take it from here and tell people about your career, and welcome. I'm glad you're with us today.
Thanks, Eileen. Hi, everybody. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about my introduction to computers. I graduated in 1969 with a degree in mathematics. At the time, there were very few colleges or universities that had a degree in computer science. And for the most part, there were very few colleges or universities that even had courses in computer science. But I was fortunate enough in my senior year, the last semester, to take a Fortran course, programming language course that was very prominent and very well known at the time. The teacher was a business professional who taught a few classes on campus in the evenings. He drove an old retrofitted van, and in that van, he had a key punch machine, a sorter, and a printer. It was only accessible during the times he was on campus, those few nights a week. After learning a little bit about Fortran, we started to write and debug our so-called toy programs. It was difficult, to say the least. We punched up the cards on a key punch machine and then submitted that deck to the teacher, where he would take it back to his office and run the program on his computer, and then return the program to us next week with the printout, whether it was successful or not. A single typo or a single logic error could set you back 2 weeks, even longer. I think I got a B in that course, but needless to say, I don't think I mastered Fortran. I started at NSA in 1969. After finishing the 6-week orientation program for newly hired mathematicians, I was selected to go into the Data Systems Intern Program, a combination of on-the-job training and coursework, and was assigned to a small section doing computer support for cryptanalysts and mathematicians doing research on Soviet crypt systems, their coded systems. The timing couldn't have been better. I got my clearances for this work just at the time the organization was getting its first supercomputer, a Control Data 6600, designed and developed by Seymour Cray, who is now known as the father of supercomputers. Primarily a research organization, this center was the cutting edge of newly developed software and support tools. IDASys was the operating system. It was interactive, no more punch cards. Developed by the Institute for Defense Analysis up at Princeton, it was one of the very first interactive operating systems in the world, and certainly the first one designed for a supercomputer, the 6600. I slowly learned Compass, which was the machine language for this system, and started to write a few programs. I realized early on that programming was not necessarily my prime interest, and so I started to branch out to do other things for the organization. I worked closely with the system manager, a term that would morph into system administrator a few years later. I learned how to use the system, keep it in top running order, and get new users enrolled in the system. It was one of my favorite jobs, and I really loved it. In the fall of 1969, there was another first at NSA. A group of female coworkers and I wore pantsuits to the agency for the very first time. We got some looks in the cafeteria and the hallways, but no negative comments from our supervisors, and we never looked back. In early 1971, I was part of the move of my larger parent organization to FanX 3, one of the buildings in NSA's external campus located out near the Baltimore-Washington International Airport. In conjunction with this move, the organization was installing a new supercomputer, the latest of the models CDC or Control Data had developed. It was installed, and towards the end of this assignment in the summer of 1971, I was providing support to a set of production programs on the 7600, which required doing a fair amount of data preparation. I ran the programs used to prep the data and stored the results on tape that would then be used as input for the long analytic runs that would be developed and run overnight. I was trying to get several sets of this data ready because I was getting ready to take 2 weeks of leave for my wedding. To this day, I don't know what I did wrong, but the results of these overnight runs produced what could be called false positive and put the organization in a tailspin, thinking they were close to solving a major crypt system. Of course, I didn't know any of this until I returned to work and the analyst had discovered the error I had introduced into the data preparation runs. I was mortified and very upset about the problems I had caused, but fortunately, my supervisor had my back and realized that it was just a mistake. I remember him saying at the time that I had punished myself enough for the mistake and that there was no further need to be worried about it. It was over. And so now is my time today. But before I leave, I want to finish with this chart that I want to show you. The next chart, Eileen, please. Comparing supercomputers of 50 years ago to those of today. As you can see, the costs were quite expensive. $200 million for the most current supercomputer developed by IBM today. Power consumption was unbelievable. These power requirements could actually provide enough power for a small city. Tremendous weight. All the floors had to be supported by special stanchions and things of that nature to be able to hold the computers. And they were so fast that if they had been just allowed to run on their own, they would literally have burned up. They had to be kept cold and cooled. In 1969, Freon was the method of choice. Today, they use chilled water pumped through the system. Significant increases in memory, as you can see on the chart, and the performance is quite incredible. Back then, 3 megaflops was about the standard for a supercomputer, the 6600, 3 times 10 to the 6th floating point operations per second. Today, we're talking about 200 petaflops, or 200 times 10 to the 15th floating point operations per second. To compare it to today's laptop, which you're probably viewing on, they were 1 million times faster than today's laptop. Another comparison you could look at would be, I'm sure some of you are very familiar with the Xbox Series X, runs today at 12 teraflops. 12 times 10 to the 12th. Absolutely incredible speeds. The advances in the technology have been incredible. And of course, technology will continue to move at a fast rate. But whether or not it will be at this speed remains to be seen. You all are fortunate enough to be able to see it in the future. Thank you for your time and attention.
We wanted to tell both teachers and students that on our queensofcode.com site that we have a resource section. And the one really good thing about looking at a computer science career or even cybersecurity is you can get started now. Even when you're home inside your house and can't get out, there are websites where you can learn programming, you can learn how to build apps and websites and do programming. And we have links to those, and many of them have free courses, and you can take the courses for free. If you want the certificate, you might have to pay for that. And also, if you're in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, they both have very interesting cybersecurity badges and cyber challenges. So that's another good way. And just for fun, if you want to see how many openings there are for cyber security professionals, you can go to a website called cyberseek.org. And as Mark mentioned too, we'll also be adding the link to all the CCI NEPRIS lectures and stuff on our course resources. And the other thing I'm going to leave you with, a little cybersecurity tips for staying safe online. This is a time where we're using the computers and online more and more. It's important that we stay safe. First thing about using a secure password, usually a combination of upper and lower case letters and special characters. And, they say a good password is kind of like your underwear. You don't show it to anyone, you change it often, and you don't share it. So that's something you can remember about your password. And don't share your passwords with friends or others outside your family. Another important thing is to protect your personal information online. Don't post your full name, address, school, email address, or phone number, because there are people out there who will take advantage if they can get into your personal information. I mean, even wearing a sweatshirt with your school name on it online presents information about you that you probably don't want out. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is to please report cyberbullying or contacts from unknown sources to your parents or trusted adults. Cyberbullying is a big problem. We know that some of you have been the victim of that. So do whatever you can to let people know if you are being cyberbullied. And also within your school and organization, try to do programs that fight against this. So I guess we will take some questions if anybody has questions. Oh, one other thing, you can follow us. We have a Facebook page and a website, and we're starting to do some Twitter feeds. And if you want to send us afterwards, if you want to send us some questions and get our advice, we are happy to provide that. We're going to be doing another session with 3 more queens next Thursday at the same time at 2:00. If you have a question for a specific queen, mention her name, or if it's a general one, you can just do it and we will find someone to respond to you. So,
well, we have a great question for both of you from our chat room. One of our guests is joining us all the way from jolly old England. And she is wondering if you guys have ever worked with the women in the UK, and was there the same female code culture in the UK as it was in the US?
Yes, we had close relationships with our partners in the UK at GCHQ, the Government Communications Headquarters organization. And yes, there were women involved with their computers too. I don't remember specifically any of them being involved that early in the late 60s or early 70s, but that doesn't mean they weren't. Many organizations back then that we partnered with, including the Brits, the Canadians, the Australians, and the New Zealanders, followed the example of NSA in terms of the hardware and software to run the specific programs that they needed to run to protect their information and to exploit the information they needed to provide intelligence for their consumers. So, yes, there were women involved more and more as time went on. But again, it tended to be more of a male-dominated organization.
I wanted to mention to anyone who's interested that Mar Hicks has written a wonderful book called Programmed Inequities and Inequalities, and it's about the women in the computer industry in Great Britain, how during the war they were like a critical part of it. But after the war, the women were kind of pushed out of higher positions in the IT industry. So it's kind of a contrast to what happened to the NSA women, where we were more embraced and we were valued and given equal. We started with equal pay with the men, and we had opportunities to try different things like project management and managing IT systems and things like that, or organizations. So that's a really good book. I'll put a link up that on our resource page too, to her book. So. And also I don't know if Maureen wants to do too. I did want to do a shout out to my grandson's fourth grade, Mrs. Ware's fourth grade class at Grant Elementary. Did you want to shout out to your grandchildren too?
Sure. My granddaughter Sydney at Old Mill Senior High, and my grandson Trevor in the STEM program at Old Mill Middle School South.
Oh, that's great. We have another question here in the Q&A that said, did any of these computers ever get hacked?
Early on, our computers were not connected to the outside. And so, we were concerned with computer security even back in the 70s. So but a lot of the hacking came when things were connected to the internet. But there was a time in NSA's history where there was some malware that was brought inside to the agency, and it infected a lot of computers, and the agency had to close down and redo their networking software for several weeks. But yeah, and even today, I think a lot of the stuff, there's a kind of protection area of things not being allowed on the internal systems, so to try to stop that.
Yeah, most of the systems back when we started were standalone systems without any connections whatsoever to the outside world or to even other computers in the building. And then as time progressed, there was an internal network that was developed and designed, and they talked to each other inside the building and inside the intelligence community. It was not until much, much later that there was a connection to the outside world on the internet as we know it today.
I'm getting some really cool comments from a lot of the young ladies who are online saying they're just so excited to be here and listening to you two. And so in that, there's a lot of girls and women on our call today. So what kind of advice, I know you talked a little bit about it, but in today's environment, in the K-12 space, what kind of things would you recommend, kind of like from a mentoring standpoint, for these girls as they get excited about this career field and what they can do to make sure they're ready for it?
Okay, one thing that I would suggest is a lot of schools now are having computer clubs. And we're seeing it like She Codes is some of the ones that are clubs that are starting to come in the different areas. In fact, they came to one of our talks that we did at Glenwood, or reaching out through scouting too. And if your school teaches some computer courses, certainly take some early courses. There's also a lot of summer camps. I think NEPRIS is going to be giving a free summer camp about computer careers, and that would also be a really good place to start. And, it's funny, I would just say look for opportunities to volunteer to help local organizations if you're building an app or building a website or even working with robotics and things like that, to reach out to ones in your community where you could kind of apprentice along with some of their more experienced computer workers.
And again, we started in the math and computer science field, and a lot of engineers were involved as well. But there are also many, many excellent computer science people who grew up in the humanities, language professors or language majors or things of that ilk that learn basic logic, the logic of how to look at a problem, take it apart, separate it into its component pieces, and try and work it from there. So you don't necessarily need to be a mathematician or a computer science or an engineer to get into the computer field, especially today. There are so many other applications where you can provide input and provide your own support.
So there's also a question about you entered the field that was primarily male dominated. How did you handle that? How did you feel about that? What were some challenges, but also what was positive about entering the workforce with us in fields where there's so many men?
Maureen, you want to start?
Sure. Quite frankly, I felt it was to my advantage to be a woman in the computer field because you were almost one of a kind, So the guys in my office would always take an interest in helping you or trying to support you. And we established great friendships and great bonds, and you could always go to them with a problem or a concern. So I guess at certain times as I advanced in my career, there were times when I felt, maybe this guy got the job because he was a bit more aggressive or assertive than I was, perhaps. But overall, I think it was to my advantage to be a woman at the agency at that time.
Thanks, Maureen.
When I was in an office that had 4 women and 4 men in our systems programming office, and we had a couple sayings around our office was if you wanted something done and you wanted it done right, you gave it to the women to do. And so that was one of the things. And the other one was they used to make us estimate our time in man hours. And we always used to say that a woman hour was worth 2 man hours because we could get things done quicker and without so much fuss.
Oh, I really like that, Eileen. That is so good. It's so true.
It was true. It was true back then.
One other question in here is, we got a couple more coming in here, but one was, did you have a lot of different buildings? You talked about a lot of different computer systems, and did you get to travel?
Okay, you want to go, Eileen, or you want me to go first?
Well, I probably didn't travel. I didn't take any overseas positions, although I did get to spend a year down as a Brookings Fellow, a fellowship down in Capitol Hill working for Senator John Kerry. So that was actually an exciting time for me. And we did take some trips. We took some trips out too. In fact, one of the trips we took, we were out doing a technology trip out to the West Coast. And it was about the same time after reading the Steve Jobs bio. It was about the same time that Steve Jobs was stealing Xerox's interface for the Wang. And we were visiting Wang because we were buying the Wang for office automation system for our organization. So in computer history, he was kind of, we liked that interface, but he was taking that interface for the Mac and the Apple system. So.
Yeah. I think it's very much dependent on the job you were in and the support you were providing to various sets of analysts in the building. I traveled, I guess, maybe once or twice a year. Other people may have traveled once or twice a month, depending on what they were involved in. We would often go to the computer manufacturers out in Chippewa Falls, for example, to visit the Cray Research Organization, or to Minneapolis to visit Control Data, or to various user groups later on when I got involved with database management systems. So there were opportunities to travel, but they were very job dependent at the time.
One other thing I was going to mention to you, made me think of that, is that NSA was on the cutting edge of technology, and we often got model number 0 of whatever computer was being built. So what that meant was they would move it into our space and it wasn't quite working. It was kind of like a beta test. So there was a lot of going back and forth trying to get these machines to work even before, IBM or CDC or Cray put them into market for other people. So we had a chance. And then one other thing, Maureen, something else, Maureen and I, even though the people in our office were very supportive, not not the men were usually that interested in like our children and babies and stuff. And Maureen and I used to meet in the ladies' room. We used to meet in the ladies' room periodically to exchange baby pictures because we had two kids that each of us that were the same age. So we would kind of secretly meet and show each other our pictures. It was before you could show. We didn't have phones. You couldn't show people your pictures on your phones. So.
That's right.
So we have one more question. How hard was it to not tell your friends and family about your work, and when did you start to feel you could discuss your work more openly?
Well, you had to keep a secret. It was part of your clearance. I mean, if you could be sent to jail, and then there are people that have been sent to jail for sharing secrets about NSA. So we felt, at least for this project, that 50 years was enough that we could finally start doing it. But we were very careful of still going through our pre-publication review before we could actually talk about this. And everything that we're talking about are things that we have had okayed to be released. I mean, that's what makes this kind of project so fun, because nobody really knew anything about what we were doing. Because women can't keep a secret.
There was a joke back then about NSA being no such agency. Mm-hmm. That's what it stood for, And Eileen is right. We were very circumspect about what we could and could not say about our jobs. But, we could talk a little bit about maybe a programming language or something like that. But it wasn't until probably the late 80s or early 90s when we even started opening up to our congressional oversight people, the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. And our director made it a point to go and solicit their support for our various programs and all. So in order to do that, he opened up the agency much more so than it had ever been open before. And gradually over time, we were able to say a little bit more about what we were doing.
Thank you very much. And I really want to thank both you, Eileen and Maureen, for being with us today. I know we've just hit the tip of the iceberg about what there is available to learn from the Queens of Code. And so all of our attendees today, thank you so much. Thank you for the lively questions, the important questions you placed in the chat room. I hope we got to them all. Thank you for providing your email addresses for folks to get back in touch with you. And I do want to echo, as a former NSA employee as well, that a lot of people don't realize that it's a lifelong commitment. Every time we talk about things from our NSA past, it has to be cleared and approved by pre-publication review and released. So what you're hearing takes a lot of work to get approved and be able to share. And we take this obligation to the grave with us. So everyone at NSA takes this very seriously. And so you had a treat today to hear a little bit of what goes on behind the closed doors, et cetera. And so with that, I really want to thank you too. Maureen and Eileen, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, I did have a little question from my grandson, and he asked me how we powered the computers back then. And I just wanted to tell him that NSA had its own electrical grid, our own power station. So we were able to power our computers using that. So
cool.
Yes. And we just wanted to say thank you for your time and attention. And we hope we were able to answer some of your questions and hope raise some interest among the students to pursue a career in this technology field. It's fascinating.
Okay, you'll have a lot of fun. It'll be a career that you'll enjoy.
Please spread the word about the next Queens of Code talk. As you can see, it is a wonderful opportunity to learn about the early days in computer science. So with that, I thank everybody for being here today, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.